They say fate always whispers before it strikes, but in a freezing Denver prison, no one expected this. A young FBI woman, framed and sentenced to die, made a final request that stunned the entire system. She didn't ask for mercy. She asked to see her canine dog one last time. What happened when the German Shepherd entered that room would expose a truth powerful enough to rewrite her destiny. Before we continue, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves canine stories, follow the channel, and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? Your support keeps stories like this alive. Winter in Denver had a cruel way of settling into the bones of the city, turning every concrete surface into a slab of ice, and every exhale into a pale cloud that drifted like a dying ghost. At the Colorado State Penitentiary, the cold seeped through every crack in the stone walls, clinging to metal bars and echoing in the hollow corridors. Outside, the sky was a flat sheet of gray, heavy with snow that refused to fall. Inside, it was colder still. And in one of the furthest cells of the East Wing, Emily Turner, 29 years old, sat with her back against a wall that never warmed. Emily was slender, almost fragile at first glance, but there was a quiet strength in the way her shoulders squared, even when she trembled from the cold. Her short brown hair, once long and soft, had been cut bluntly as per prison rules. Her skin, usually fair, looked almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the faint freckles across her cheeks had faded from stress. But nothing dimmed her eyes, large, sharp, and hazel, full of a fight she could no longer show. Her blue inmate uniform hung loosely on her frame. She'd lost weight in the months since her arrest, not from lack of food, but from the weight of betrayal. Before all this, Emily had worked as a logistics coordinator, a job that demanded precision, honesty, and grit, qualities she possessed in abundance. Yet none of that mattered when a coworker, driven by greed and envy, framed her for a corporate embezzlement scheme. The trial had been swift, ruthless, and public. Evidence was planted, witnesses rehearsed, the verdict predetermined. Emily had watched her life collapse not in a moment, but in layers, slow, devastating, and irreversible. Now she waited for the needle, not because she was guilty, but because the world had decided she must be. Still, the cold prison wasn't what hurt her most. What carved into her heart every night wasn't the loneliness or fear of dying. It was the absence of Hunter, her 5-year-old German Shepherd. Hunter had black and tan fur, thick and glossy, with dark amber eyes that always seemed to understand more than a dog should. Emily had raised him from a pup, through storms and loneliness, laughter and grief. He had been her shield, her joy, her last piece of home. The memory of him curled beside her bed in her tiny Denver apartment haunted her more than the sentence hanging over her head. That afternoon, the sound of boots echoed through the corridor. Warden Malcolm Reeves, a man in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, appeared outside Emily's cell. His face was as stern as carved granite, with deep lines around his mouth and thick eyebrows that shadowed cold gray eyes. His short silver-streaked hair was always combed with military precision. He had once been a compassionate man, but years of violence, riots, and loss, particularly the shooting of his younger brother years ago, had hardened him into someone who clung to rules like armor. To the inmates, he was unshakable, unmovable, ice in human form. Reeves cleared his throat. "Turner," he said, voice low but firm. "Protocol requires me to ask for your final request." Emily lifted her head, her hazel eyes meeting his without fear. Fear had left her weeks ago.
Anything you want before the scheduled time, the warden continued, though his tone betrayed no warmth, only duty. A meal, a phone call, a letter. If there's something you need, you say it now.
Emily shook her head gently. I don't want a final meal, she murmured. I don't want a phone call. There's only one thing I want. Reeves raised an eyebrow. The corridor grew silent. Even the draft seemed to pause. Emily inhaled, steadying her trembling hands. I want to see my dog, she whispered. Hunter, my German shepherd. Reeves blinked, taken aback. For years he had heard last requests ranging from the strange to the grotesque, but never something like this. Your dog? His voice wavered just enough to betray surprise. Are you certain? Emily nodded once, a small, fragile gesture that held more weight than a shout. He was the only good thing in my life, she said softly. Reeves didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the thick case file he always carried. He flipped through the pages with mechanical precision, until something slipped from between the documents and fluttered to the floor. A photograph. Reeves bent down and picked it up. The moment he turned it over, his breath caught. The photo showed a younger Emily kneeling in the snow, smiling brightly, her hair long and loose, her arms wrapped around a tiny German shepherd puppy with oversized paws and bright amber eyes. She looked alive, unguarded, filled with a joy he had never seen in the woman now sitting before him. Something in the warden's face shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something colder, older. The photograph trembled slightly in his gloved hand, and in a voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking to a memory rather than Emily, he muttered, No, it can't be. The corridor fell silent again, heavy with a tension Emily could not explain. Something had changed, something she didn't understand. And for the first time in months, the warden did not look like stone. He looked haunted. Chapter ends on this mysterious moment. The night Emily was arrested had carved itself into Hunter's memory like a wound. The snow had been falling hard that evening, thick flakes swirling in the glow of streetlights, when the police stormed into the small Denver apartment. Hunter, then a powerful 5-year-old German shepherd with a muscular frame, thick black and tan coat, and fierce amber eyes, had leapt between Emily and the officers the moment they reached for her. He had barked with a fury no one had seen before, teeth bared, body bristling. It took 3 officers, each wearing heavy winter patrol jackets and tactical gloves, to restrain him. Even then, Hunter dragged them across the linoleum floor, claws scraping desperately as Emily screamed his name. His resistance earned him a sedative injection. When he awoke, she was gone. He never forgot the sound of her voice breaking. After that night, Hunter was transported to the Denver Animal Rescue Center, a facility built of concrete and chain-link fencing, its hallways echoing with the cries of abandoned pets. The center's staff worked through Colorado's brutal winter, wearing thick fleece jackets, jeans stiff from cold, and heavy boots that left wet trails on the tile floors. Among them was Sarah Donovan, a 34-year-old intake coordinator with pale Irish skin, shoulder-length red hair, usually tied in a messy ponytail, and round glasses that sat crooked on her nose. She had a warm personality, but carried a lingering melancholy from losing her own dog the previous year to cancer. That loss made her more gentle than most when handling animals who were grieving. When Hunter arrived, she immediately noticed the rigid tension in his muscles and the sharp, scanning look in his eyes, like a soldier left behind. "This one's too loyal for his own good,"
one of the handlers remarked. Hunter refused food for days. He growled whenever someone approached wearing a police-like uniform. He paced endlessly, nose tilted toward the ventilation system as if trying to catch the fading scent of the only human he trusted. Other staff attempted basic training sessions, offering treats, toys, and gentle commands, but Hunter responded with nothing but silent vigilance. He didn't want a new home. He wanted Emily. Weeks passed, and the shelter grew crowded. Snow piled higher outside, making the world feel smaller, quieter. Then one afternoon, a rugged pickup truck rolled into the shelter's parking lot, its tires cracking through frozen slush. Out stepped Carl Benson, a 62-year-old retired U.S. Army sergeant. Carl was tall, but carried a slight stoop from an old back injury sustained during a rescue mission years ago. His beard was thick and silver, his hands calloused, and his blue eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much loss but still chose kindness. He wore a simple green flannel shirt under a worn brown jacket and faded jeans, clothes that made him look like he had stepped out of a life far simpler than his past allowed. Carl had lost his wife 2 winters earlier. Since then, he lived alone on a small ranch outside Denver, taking in rescue dogs whenever he could. The shelter staff respected him deeply. He was patient, experienced, and had a calming presence even the most anxious animals responded to. But when Sarah introduced him to Hunter, even she held her breath. Hunter didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stared at Carl with steady, intelligent focus, tail still, ears forward. Carl knelt slowly, knees cracking from age. "You've been waiting for someone," he murmured. Hunter stepped forward, placed one paw on Carl's knee, and let out a soft, broken whine. Sarah turned away, blinking back sudden tears. That was all it took. Carl signed the papers, but even after Hunter moved to the ranch, where the air smelled of pine and hay, where horses grazed behind rail fences, and where Carl's worn farmhouse glowed warmly at night, Hunter never settled. Every evening, just as the sun dipped behind the snow-covered Rockies, he walked to the old wooden fence that bordered the property and stared east toward Denver. His tail stayed low, his ears flat, his entire body filled with longing. Carl watched him often, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, breath rising in small clouds. "You're still looking for her," he would say quietly. And Hunter would not move. Months passed this way. Then one icy morning, as Carl sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee from a chipped navy mug, a knock sounded at the door. Standing outside were 2 state officials, bundled in heavy winter coats. One was Officer Mark Collins, a 39-year-old transport officer with sharp cheekbones, olive skin, short dark hair, and a trimmed beard. The other was Lisa Warren, a 27-year-old administrative aide with long black braids, warm brown skin, and attentive eyes framed by minimal makeup. Carl invited them in, and they explained the request. A prisoner on death row had made a final wish: to see her dog. And that dog was Hunter. Carl's expression froze. He stared toward the back door where Hunter lay curled by the heater. For a long moment, the old sergeant said nothing, his jaw tightening. "He never forgot her," Carl finally whispered. "But seeing her now, I don't know what that will do to him." His voice cracked on the last word. Still, he nodded. "If this is her last request, he deserves to go." As Hunter was lifted gently into the back of the state vehicle, his entire body trembled, not from the cold, but from instinct, from memory, from knowing something enormous was waiting, something that would change everything. The visitation chamber of the Colorado State Penitentiary had been transformed into something closer to a military checkpoint than a meeting room. Bright overhead lights cast hard shadows on the white cinderblock walls, making every corner look harsh and unforgiving. Metal chairs scraped against cold tile as officers positioned them with mechanical precision. 4 armed guards stood spaced around the room, each wearing heavy tactical vests, navy uniforms, and black boots polished to a mirror shine. Their expressions were carved in stone, their postures rigid, their hands resting close to holstered weapons. Not because they feared the prisoner, but because they feared the unknown. Emily Turner entered, flanked by 2 escorts. Her blue prison uniform looked even more rigid under the glare of fluorescent light, the stiff collar brushing against her jaw. Her wrists were confined in metal cuffs linked by a short chain, making her movement small, almost hesitant. She walked with her shoulders straight, though her breathing was shallow. Her short brown hair was tucked behind her ears, and the harsh lighting exaggerated the hollows beneath her cheekbones. The guards guiding her were Officer Daniel Hughes, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with dark skin, a shaved head, and a calm, disciplined demeanor built from 2 decades in corrections, and Officer Rachel Kim, a 31-year-old Korean-American woman with sharp features, black hair pulled into a strict bun, and a stern professionalism shaped by her early career in juvenile rehabilitation. Neither looked at Emily with cruelty. Instead, they held the distant alertness of people who had learned never to grow attached to inmates or their stories. On the opposite side of the room, the door opened and Hunter entered. The moment he appeared, the temperature of the room seemed to shift. Hunter's thick black and tan coat stood slightly on end, his tail held low but alert. His ears pointed forward, scanning. The officer handling him, Deputy Charles Miller, a 28-year-old blonde, freckled, good-natured man who had joined the sheriff's department only a year earlier, held the leash with both hands. Even with his youthful face and amicable personality, Charles had tensed shoulders, aware he was guiding a powerful animal into a situation weighted with emotion. Hunter took 3 steps inside. Then he froze. His amber eyes widened, his head tilted. The air between him and Emily tightened like a drawn bowstring. And then he lunged. Charles staggered forward as the leash was nearly ripped from his hands. Hunter barreled across the room, claws scraping against the polished floor, chest heaving with recognition. A collective gasp rippled through the guards. Emily's knees buckled as she exhaled a trembling breath. She sank down instinctively, despite the cuffs, her body folding toward the dog she thought she would never see again. Hunter stopped inches from her, trembling violently, whining with desperate relief. Emily lifted her cuffed hands toward his face, her fingers brushing through the familiar thick fur. Tears spilled down her pale cheeks. "Hunter? Oh, God! Hunter!" she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. Hunter pressed his forehead against her chest, tail thumping the floor with rapid, uncontrolled joy. Even the guards, hardened, stoic, desensitized by years of witnessing human tragedy, looked away. Officer Hughes clenched his jaw, blinking rapidly. Rachel Kim shifted her stance, pressing her lips together. Charles wiped at his eye as subtly as he could. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt. For a moment, the entire prison felt like it had inhaled and held its breath. But then something changed. Something subtle, almost invisible. Until suddenly, it wasn't. Hunter stiffened. His tail dropped. His ears flattened. His body tensed as if an unseen current had jolted through him. A soft growl rumbled in his chest. Not aggressive, but warning. The guards immediately raised their guard, hands moving toward weapons, but Hunter wasn't focused on them. He circled Emily once, slow and deliberate. His nose lowered toward her uniform, then her chest, then the area just above her heart. His growl deepened. Emily looked up, confused, wiping tears from her lashes. "Hunter? Hey, what's wrong?" Hunter ignored her voice. He nudged her sternum with increasing urgency, his claws slipping slightly on the floor as he pawed at the spot just below her collarbone. Deputy Miller attempted to pull the leash gently. "Easy, boy. Easy." But Hunter wouldn't move. He barked once, sharp, anxious, pleading. Then again. Then he pressed himself against Emily as if shielding her. The guards exchanged uneasy looks. Officer Hughes stepped closer, voice tense. "Is he sensing something? A trigger? Pain response?" Rachel Kim murmured, "Dogs don't act like this unless—" Her voice trailed off. Even Warden Reeves, who had been observing through the viewing window, his tall figure backlit by harsh fluorescent glow, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Emily's breath hitched as she placed a hand over the place Hunter had been clawing. Suddenly, she felt it, an irregular flutter inside her chest. Faint, yet undeniably real. The room grew colder. No one understood what Hunter had detected, but the urgency in his eyes left no room for doubt. Something was wrong, and it had nothing to do with fear, but survival. The reunion that had filled the prison with awe now shifted into a moment of silent dread, one that none of them were prepared for. Chaos didn't erupt immediately. It seeped into the room in slow, heavy waves, beginning with the shift in Hunter's posture. His growl had already unsettled everyone, but when Emily's face suddenly drained of color, her breathing turning shallow and uneven, the guards exchanged alarmed glances. Officer Hughes stepped forward, his calm demeanor cracking as he lifted a hand to signal emergency protocol. "Get medical!" he barked, and his voice, usually steady, carried an edge of urgency. Officer Rachel Kim immediately triggered her radio, her sharp voice echoing through the chamber. Moments later, the steel door slammed open, and Dr. William Harris hurried inside. Harris was 55, tall with narrow shoulders, a clean-shaven face, and thin gray hair combed carefully to the side. His rectangular glasses sat on the bridge of his long nose, and deep, under-eye circles hinted at decades of long shifts and sleepless nights. He wore a dark green medical jacket over scrubs, and his calm, analytical demeanor often made inmates believe he felt nothing. In truth, Harris had once worked in a Denver ER, where he lost a young patient due to a misdiagnosis early in his career, a memory that drove him to double-check every symptom he encountered, no matter how small. Now he knelt beside Emily with quiet intensity. Emily tried to speak, but managed only a faint gasp. Sweat gathered on her hairline despite the freezing room. Hunter whined and pressed against her legs, nudging her with trembling urgency. "Back the dog up," Harris instructed, though not harshly. Deputy Miller tugged the leash, but Hunter planted himself like stone. Harris hesitated. Dogs were rarely wrong about distress, but time was short. He placed his stethoscope against Emily's chest. The moment the faint, irregular rhythm reached his ears, his expression shifted sharply. He pressed again, more firmly this time. His shoulders stiffened. Then he looked up at the guards, voice grave. "She's in cardiac distress. Severe arrhythmia. If this progresses, she could go into full cardiac arrest." Every guard froze. Rachel Kim's hand dropped from her holster. Hughes released a shaky breath. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Harris cut in, "this woman could die before the state does anything to her." Emily slumped forward, and Hunter barked sharply, as if punctuating the doctor's words. The German shepherd then positioned himself between Emily and Harris, his body rigid, his amber eyes blazing with protective fury. "Easy, boy," Harris murmured, raising both hands. "I'm helping her." Hunter paused, muscles coiled, before reluctantly allowing Harris to continue. The door burst open again as Warden Malcolm Reeves entered, his imposing figure stiff with tension. His hard gray eyes took in the scene: the pale prisoner, the frantic dog, the guards at a standstill. For a moment, he seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as the prison walls. "Report," Reeves demanded. Harris stood. "She needs immediate transfer to a hospital. If not, she may not survive the next hour." Reeves flinched almost imperceptibly, remembering the photograph that had unsettled him earlier. But before he could speak, Hunter barked, loud and piercing, toward the viewing window where other staff were gathered. It was a desperate, commanding sound, the kind dogs made when danger hovered unseen. Word spread through the prison faster than any announcement. By the evening, the news had already reached the streets of Denver. And Denver, facing one of its coldest winters in years, responded. Crowds began gathering outside the prison gates, wrapped in heavy coats, scarves pulled to their noses, breaths rising in white clouds. They were construction workers with calloused hands, college students clutching steaming coffee cups, retirees leaning on canes, mothers holding signs above their heads. Among them stood Pastor Aaron Wells, a 47-year-old African-American minister with kind eyes, a short beard, and a long wool coat. He had heard the story on local radio and came to pray for mercy. Someone else brought blankets to share. Someone else, hot chocolate. The chanting started softly at first, scattered and shaky. "The dog saved her. Let her live." Then louder. "Justice with mercy." Reporters soon arrived, pointing cameras at the trembling gates, capturing the flurry of snow around the protesters like shimmering white sparks of hope. Inside, the prison command center buzzed with tension. Advisors argued. Legal teams scrambled. Reeves stood like an iron statue, while messages from the governor's office flooded in. Hours later, after a heated statewide discussion, the governor of Colorado, Elias Monroe, made the decision. Governor Monroe was a man in his early 50s with silvering black hair, olive skin, sharp features, and a reputation for integrity. A former civil rights attorney, he carried himself with a calm, thoughtful presence, though stress lines carved deeply into his forehead from years of political battles. He looked squarely into the cameras at a late-night press conference. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice steady despite the storm outside. "The execution of Emily Turner is suspended. She will receive emergency medical treatment. A full review of her case will follow." Back in the prison, Reeves hung up the phone and exhaled, a long, slow breath that sounded like surrender or relief. Maybe both. "Get her ready for transport," he ordered quietly. Hunter pressed himself against Emily as guards prepared the stretcher, refusing to move until they allowed him to follow. And for the first time, no one stopped him, because everyone now believed what the dog already knew. Emily wasn't dying because she was guilty. She was dying because fate had been twisted against her. Hunter stayed glued to her side, a silent sentinel against death itself. Snow fell over Denver like a soft white curtain the morning Emily was transferred to Denver Health Medical Center. The winter storm had worsened overnight, turning streets into winding rivers of slush and covering every rooftop in thick, glittering frost. The ambulance lights flashed silently across the icy roads as paramedics loaded Emily onto the stretcher. Her skin was pale against the white hospital blanket, breath shallow but steady. Hunter followed closely, escorted by officers who seemed unsure whether they were letting in a dog or a guardian angel. Inside the ambulance, Hunter sat wedged beside the stretcher, his head pressed gently against Emily's arm. A paramedic named Lena Morris, a 34-year-old woman with copper-red hair tied back in a messy bun, freckles dusting her fair skin, and warm hazel eyes, watched with astonishment. Lena, known for her calm under pressure, had been an EMT for 12 years after losing her brother in a car accident, an event that pushed her to save others where she once couldn't.
"He knows she's scared," Lena murmured, adjusting the oxygen mask on Emily's face.
Hunter looked up at the paramedic, not threatening but fiercely alert, as if evaluating whether Lena's intentions were pure. The ride felt endless, filled with the low hum of medical equipment and the distant howl of winter wind. When they arrived, hospital staff hurried Emily into the operating room. For the first time, Hunter was stopped at the threshold. He whimpered, pacing anxiously, refusing to sit despite the security guard's attempts to calm him. The guard, a tall man named Thomas Avery with dark skin, wide shoulders, and a fatherly softness beneath his stern expression, crouched to reassure him. "She's in the best hands now, boy," he said gently. "Let them work." But Hunter kept his gaze glued to the door, as though sheer willpower could send strength to Emily through the walls. Hours crawled by. Snow continued to fall. Nurses and physicians came and went, all pausing at least once to glance at the anxious German shepherd, whose loyalty radiated through the room like warmth. Then, near dawn, Dr. Julia Sanderson, a 46-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon with sharp cheekbones, short dark hair streaked with silver, and the composed posture of a woman who had performed thousands of life-or-death procedures, stepped into the hallway. Her voice was calm but not cold as she addressed the waiting staff and officers. "The surgery was successful. She stabilized beautifully." Hunter barked once, a sharp, joyous sound that echoed through the sterile corridor. Hours later, when Emily slowly regained consciousness, her vision blurry from anesthesia, the first thing she saw was a pair of amber eyes. Hunter rested his head on the edge of her hospital bed, breathing softly, as if guarding her dreams. Emily's voice cracked into a whisper. "You're here." Hunter gently nudged her hand with his muzzle, and her fingers curled. Into the thick black and tan fur she missed more than freedom itself. Over the following weeks, as Emily recovered, a group of independent attorneys, led by Marcus Hale, a 40-year-old defense lawyer with sandy brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a lean build, and a relentless sense of justice shaped by watching his father be wrongfully imprisoned decades earlier, took interest in Emily's case. Marcus was meticulous, patient, and sharp as a razor. He and his team combed through every document, every testimony, every missing detail. And they uncovered everything: the falsified emails, the bribed witness, the co-worker who framed her to cover his own embezzlement scheme. The truth rose like a storm. When the hearing took place 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the rows, cameras flashing. Citizens crowded the hallways. Even the judge seemed to feel the weight of history in the making. Emily entered wearing a modest gray blouse and black slacks provided by the state. A simple outfit, but one that made her feel human again. Hunter walked beside her wearing a service harness, calm but alert, earning smiles from nearly everyone in the courtroom. Marcus presented the evidence with precision and quiet fire. When the corrupt co-worker, Daniel Price, a thin man in his late 30s with nervous blue eyes and a habit of tugging his sleeves, was exposed, the room murmured with outrage. The judge, an older woman named Eleanor Whitford with silver hair in a tight bun and firm, intelligent eyes, struck the gavel after hours of testimony. "The conviction is vacated. Emily Turner is fully exonerated. The state issues an apology for the miscarriage of justice." Emily covered her face with trembling hands. Hunter pressed against her legs, tail wagging as though he understood every word. Freedom came not with fireworks, but with breath. A breath she hadn't allowed herself in 3 long years. Emily left Denver soon after, moving to Seattle where the misty rain felt like a rebirth. She found work at a canine training center, wearing durable outdoor gear and waterproof boots as she trained dogs for search and rescue units. Hunter, now known by locals as the hero shepherd, trotted proudly beside her each morning. Children hugged him, neighbors greeted him, and officers sought him out for demonstrations. And every evening, Emily walked Hunter along the wet Seattle streets, the glow of street lamps reflecting off puddles like scattered stars. Two souls once swallowed by darkness now walked in the light, saved by loyalty, truth, and a bond that refused to die. The happy ending was real, and this time, it belonged entirely to them. Sometimes, all it takes is the loyalty of a dog to awaken the justice of a nation. Sometimes, the prayers whispered in the darkest prisons are heard by someone greater. Emily's story is not just about a wrongful sentence. It's about a fate rewritten by love, by truth, and maybe, just maybe, by a miracle. If you believe that no soul is ever truly forgotten, that God still works through the most unexpected messengers, even a German shepherd named Hunter, then share this story. Leave a comment for those still waiting for their miracle. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. May God bless you and every innocent voice still fighting to be heard.